Hey guys, we're here to talk all about the 8th episode of Game of Thrones Season 6, No One. So if you haven't seen No One, stop watching. Being dramatic.
You are. It's very dramatic. We're someone, and we're excited about it.
We are some people. So let's talk about it. All right, you've been warned. I didn't like this episode, and I love Game of Thrones. This might have been my least favorite episode of Game of Thrones. The more I think about it.
I have a hard time of getting out of the perspective of each season.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's my least favorite episode. It's probably not. There probably was something in season 2 that I was like, meh. I think part of it for me is the storylines that I'm most invested in this season, and these are totally, each person has their own favorite characters and favorite storylines. So this might have been your favorite, but I love Jon and Sansa's storyline this season, and I love Bran, and I feel like those have the most weight to them. And while there were a lot of great sequences in here, there were a couple moments, a couple storylines even, that were sort of like, well, what was the point of all of it? And so we're going to get to that in a bit. But I agree with you. I feel the focus was a lot on the humor and the comedy, which worked in some cases, but I just, it didn't have the weight I wanted from a Game of Thrones episode this far into the season.
Yeah, and look, it's all a sliding scale. It's all relative. Game of Thrones is an awesome show. It's one of my favorite shows. I just didn't think this episode was sort of up to par for them, and there were some stuff that made me feel dissatisfied with some specific storylines we're going to get into, and then other things where I just thought, oh, that moment, that could have landed bigger. That could have been more impactful. Let's just start with Meereen, which...
Speaking of moments that could have been more impactful.
Because we had this siege happen, and then...
Well, what's funny to me is that the scene with Tyrion getting Grey Worm and Missandei to tell him jokes was longer than the siege and Daenerys' arrival.
Yeah.
And I think I'm in the minority, but I love those Tyrion, Grey Worm, Missandei scenes. I love seeing, Game of Thrones doesn't take the time to do that with its characters and have those quieter moments. And I love them when it feels like there's growth. And I think there was in that scene, and it was really funny. But it just felt off that, the siege at Meereen is something that it's just like a big chunk of the books, to the point that George R. R. Martin said the Meereen is not like how to resolve all the storylines in A Dance with Dragons is the reason it took so long for him to publish it. So the fact that it was like 20 seconds of, oh, the Masters are here, oh, look at this incredible shot of maybe they just ran out of budget. I thought that sequence was incredible with them attacking Meereen, and then there's this cool moment where, you hear these sounds and it's that Drogon has landed and Dany arrives, and then that's it.
Yeah, it was oddly sort of underwhelming because, there's that one amazing shot. There was that, oh my gosh, this is great. It's spiraling around, the way that there was like those sort of, the sort of explosives were spinning around before they'd hit. So cool. But then it was like you kind of felt, again, it's a TV show. They have a restricted, but even though it's probably the most expensive show on the air, they still have a restricted budget.
And restricted time.
It's restricted time. But to just have like one big effect shot back into an interior, and then Dany shows up and is like, I got this. I don't know. It felt like it could have landed in a bigger, better way.
It reminded me a bit of the scene with Arya in last week's episode in The Broken Man, where it was like, there's this crazy thing where Arya gets stabbed, but it doesn't quite land the right way because, one, you never think Arya is actually going to die, especially in that episode. And also it's such a short moment that it doesn't quite have the impact it needed. And it's interesting, I did an interview with the director of these 2 episodes, because this season they've sort of been paired off. Each director directs something back to back, and he said, it's not necessarily up to the director to dictate how much screen time these get.
Sure.
David and Dan, or Brian Cogman or Dave Hill, whoever wrote the script, pretty much comes with it fully formed. So it might have just been one of those things that sounded really great on paper, but when you're in the editing room, or maybe they thought it was great, or you thought it was great, but for us it just didn't quite land. And I would have been okay with them just saving that for the beginning of an episode and really leading into it.
And also I should say, I like too, the scenes of them sitting around and tell a joke. I think those are humanizing, necessary moments in a show like Game of Thrones. I did wonder, maybe we've had 1 or 2 more than we need with that particular group of characters through the season, because I'll say Bronn and Pod was a great scene in this episode of that ilk. It wasn't important story-wise, but it's a great, here's some peripheral characters having a fun sort of humanizing conversation.
And catharsis too, because I love Bronn's line where he said, I didn't think you'd live this long.
Right.
And these two characters who both, were allies with Tyrion and traveled for so long to see one another again. I agree with you. I really liked that moment, and even the acknowledgement of that Jaime totally wants to have sex with Brienne, which I love. The everything that went. Oh, and Pod's prowess in the brothel.
Right, very important.
We always need to bring that up.
But in Meereen, it just seems like maybe they just spent a little too much time on some of that stuff without the bigger stuff. It's the balancing act, right? That's what it's all about. Based on the previews for next week's episode, we're assuming it's probably a hyper-focused episode 9, which they often do. We're like one location, or primarily one location. And so there's a good chance we're not in Meereen in episode 9. Do you think by the finale, like this is it? Like we are, getting, now that she's got the Dothraki back with her, and there's the possibility of a fleet, out there. What do you think this is? We're about to finally leave Meereen?
Yeah, I think instead of getting the hell out of Dodge, they're getting the hell out of Meereen.
Yeah.
I think that they're going to wrap that up this season. Now, whether that means that Dany is going to head straight to Westeros or maybe make any pit stops along the way, I do think that we've been a Meereen for a while. It's time to move on, especially with the end drawing ever nearer. Like you can feel that hanging over the show. So I think that the reason why the siege happened so quickly is because we are getting close to the end. Though it's certainly not a good sign if Dany is just going to leave behind a destroyed, shattered shell of a city. And then she's a conqueror. She's not a ruler.
Yeah, and that's it. Before we move on from Meereen, I guess that's the other sort of frustration is, Tyrion, was sort of, who's a very smart character, and he was sort of looking at the long game, and that was his whole thing of like, I'll tell them, you have to stop slavery in 7 years, and, that's kind of maybe the way you have to do it, But then he was just wrong. So yeah, it's like kind of weird if like the two of them are kind of just leaving destruction in their wake and
it is
possible slavery.
I will say I love that line from Grey Worm where Tyrion tries to give him advice and Grey Worm is like, "Nuh-uh, you don't know anything about this army.
Yeah,
you were wrong about this." Yeah, and I think that when Tyrion came in, there was an imbalance with Dany's advisors, and now the playing field is a bit more leveled, and hopefully Tyrion is a little bit humbled with the understanding, sort of what Dany had, that your negotiation skills that you learned before don't necessarily work here.
Yeah, and maybe it'll have to be about Dany realizing she can't do it all, and yeah, it's like if her end game is still to go back to Westeros and conquer, maybe she can't also fix the problems everywhere she is along the way.
That being said, I'm not convinced that there's going to be any King's Landing for her to actually conquer, which we'll get to in a bit. But I think that was interesting and something that also fell into place a little bit for me last night, is like this theory came forward again that we'll delve into a little bit later in the show. But I was like, for all that she plans to go in and conquer, she already had that image of, the castle destroyed, the Red Keep destroyed, and everything sort of like covered in what we assumed was snow. So I think maybe that might be what welcomes her when she gets there.
Yeah. So let us know what you think in the comments. What do you think is the Meereen storyline coming to an end? And what do you think of the way they sort of did this episode and the balance of the character interaction versus that battle at the end? Was it too rushed? Did you want to see more of Dany's arrival riding in on that dragon rather than have her just kind of come in there through the window? Let us know in the comments, and let us move on to Braavos, where, I don't know, it was funny because, within that 1 week of Game of Thrones airing, you mentioned the fact that no one really bought that Arya was going to die, and then there was all these theories because, frankly, none of us liked or bought into as a character. It seemed a flaw in the writing that she was so caught unaware, right? Which led to a million theories about like, oh, she knew it, so it was like stage blood, which that was a stretch because she would have to have known she was going to go for the gut.
Right.
Then there was all these things about like,
split personality.
The split personality Matt Fowler called the Fight Club idea,
Which I actually did love that.
Right. And then there was like Jaqen was,
Jaqen and Arya,
the Jaqen was like maybe it was him, not the way, like there was so many different ways people were thinking it played out. He was Arya because he was testing the waif.
Right.
No, Arya
it was
was caught
and
on.
I did this interview with the director, and I asked him about that scene because
Yeah.
he did the two, and he said, it's a little bit open to interpretation, but the way he interpreted it was Arya did let her guard down in this moment, with looking out at the view and ready to go home. She's made this decision, and then in that moment, it is a mistake and a nearly fatal one that the wave kills her, which I think was everyone's least favorite version of that story. And also, as this episode was playing out, I kept waiting for there to be another fold. There were sort of these lingering shots on Lady Crane. I kept waiting for her to be a faceless, her to take off her face and it be Jaqen, or this was all part of a test that Arya had to take, and maybe the waif was failing her test or something. But no, just pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I thought when Jaqen even told the wave to kill her that there was some extra level to it happening.
Because he said, do it painlessly.
Yeah.
And she's like, so I'm just going to keep making that psycho noise.
Right. So it was what you see is what you get, which I think that was disappointing, mostly because it just seemed very out of character for Arya to be, at this point, be caught unawares. Also, I think, ultimately it leads to a frustration here that this was pretty much almost 2 full seasons in Braavos. And I don't know, I definitely know that I don't think this was worth 2 full seasons. I mean, when all is said and done, we assume Arya will come out of this. She's more skilled, clearly she can fight in the dark. She probably has other skills she might be able to, whip out at some point. But she already went in, she's pretty badass. She had a pretty big body count. So for them to spend that much time on what could have been a couple episodes, and we're going to talk next about a storyline that was only 2 episodes yet. We're not really sure why they did it. I get why they did this in sort of a bigger sense, but it just felt like, why that much time?
Well, it's interesting because the Arya who came to Braavos was very confident and very cocky and very sure that this was her mission, this was her journey. She comes in, she's like, make me a faceless man. She had to be humbled. And that was a lot of last season. I get that she went through that, but the fact that she was so foolish still as to make that mistake last episode really makes me question how much she did learn. Yes, because she was blind, she can now fight in the dark. But she was so grievously injured, and she still managed to come out, and she decided, no, I'm going to be Arya Stark. I'm going to go home. That's great, but I agree with you. I think part of the reasons it had to be 2 seasons is because we crossed this threshold where we went from the show catching up to the books, and I think honestly the reason they ended so many storylines where they did at the end of A Dance with Dragons is to buy George 1 extra year. I think pretty much everyone expected he would get wins out before season 6, including him, and he didn't. And so now there's just this different sense of pacing where they're like, okay, we're doing it. We're going into unknown territory, and we got to do it at our own pace now. We can't try and slow down for the books anymore. And I think that's why things are happening. I think if maybe they had reached that point at the beginning of season 5, the Braavos storyline wouldn't have been as expanded as it is.
Yeah, because actually I think it was Alan Sepinwall I was reading last night said something that I was like, in retrospect, it's like it almost feels like this should have been off camera like Bran, Like she reaches there, maybe we see her start her training, and then a year and a half later she comes back. Now, reasonably, it's like Arya's too popular a character to keep off camera that long, whatnot.
But she lost some of her popularity.
But that's the thing; it did because it started to drag so much, and because it's like no one was rooting for, nor did we really believe the storyline would end with her being like, "Yep, I'm no one. Forget Arya Stark, and that's it." Right? And so that's why it's like, yeah, you could have done a much more condensed version of this storyline, I felt, and that's why it's kind of frustrating when it's all said and done. And I think that's why we were extra frustrated that it even had like a very what you see is what you get with the way it all happened.
I will tell you that for all the Faceless Men storyline, what isn't my favorite part of this season, I love Lady Crane. I love what Essie Davis did with that character. I thought it was really impactful, Arya watching the show and sort of the development, even seeing, the payoff of her advice of Lady Crane.
She took her notes.
I know, of Lady Crane playing an angry Cersei and sort of the juxtaposition of that with actual Cersei. Like, I loved everything about that, and as much as it did feel like we saw a softer Arya with Lady Crane, I liked that side of Arya we saw, and also her acknowledgement of like, what's west of Westeros? No one knows. I want to know.
Right.
I almost wrote an article about it, and I was like, no, like we We don't know.
It's like the Catalina of Westeros.
Yeah, it's the Catalina.
People
it's
chilling
like,
on an island.
the vacation spot of Westeros that only a select few people know about. I wonder if Arya is going to end with sort of a Grey Haven's Lord of the Rings moment, and like at the end of the story, once everything is done, we are going to see her sail off to the west and go and find something and never hear from her again. I think I could see that being a bittersweet, but almost like nice ending for that character who's been through so much, and really, as much as she's going home, doesn't have too much.
Right. It also, I have to say, it felt, like a stretch, to say the least, that she was running at all, given the injury she had just had, it just...
I thought they did an okay job of doing that.
Okay job, but I felt like it should have been much more of a burden to her until she fell down all the stairs. And by the way, people in Braavos suck.
I know, they're the worst.
They do not stop for anything. Like, they saw a girl tumble down like 25 steps and they're just like, oh, origins.
I will say, like, we've teased this show so much for its jumps in logic that it's done, especially, and it's funny, I did an interview also this week with Nikolai Coster-Waldau, who plays Jaime, and he even sort of joked about like the speed ravens in Westeros that managed to like get news all over so quickly. With Arya, I did buy it because I think, number one, she'd had the milk of the poppy. She'd just come and woken up after like being bound. I could see her having just that briefest period of time before the pain sets back in. And also that burst of adrenaline of, oh, I'm going to die if I don't run. I think her initial running before she rolled down the stairs, but also sort of hit a wall that we saw, was small enough that I bought that as her being able to escape in the way that she did.
I should say, so it's not like I'm only complaining. The two things I will say, though, I liked here, though, was I liked the waifs T-1000-esque, you know what I mean? I really liked when she came up on the side there, kind of quietly. It was cool. Like, that was all really well done. And we're gonna, I think we're both gonna complain, I know I am, about something else that happened off camera in a minute, but I thought that the fight happening off camera worked, her cutting the candle. You still got if you were looking for something visceral, you got the waif's face. So
I thought that payoff.
We didn't need to see that fight, even though I would have still been, cheering if Arya got to hit her with a stick a few times after all. So I thought that worked, even though I felt like maybe she should have been a little more wounded while running. The chase itself was exciting, and the off-camera way she got rid of the waif.
Could Jaqen end up being like any lamer by the end, though? Like, he was such a cool character, and then at the end, like, he was just sort of like a pussycat at the where he didn't know that she came in. Like, I mean, she was pretty wounded. How did she sneak in there? And everything that happened, and then even I think he was proud. I think that was the outcome he wanted, but even his like, now you're no one. He's been one step ahead of Arya this entire time. He can't actually think that, her killing the waif in that way and everything she did would lead to her being no one. Of course she's Arya Stark.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That Jaqen was a character I was so excited to have come back and thought was so interesting. And I'm not convinced that that's the last we'll see of him, though I think if that is the end of his storyline, it is a perfectly satisfying end. But I just thought he sort of like started with a bang and ended with a puff for me.
Yeah, and then overall, more to me, it's just like, and you might be very right as far as like if the books had been out, it might have played out differently on the show pacing wise. But when you look now that we spent, 2 years in Braavos
for questionable amounts of character development.
Questionable amount of character development. Yeah. So let us move on to Riverrun. It's more complaining.
Your other favorite, like you sent notes, and like your notes for this episode were, what was the point of Braavos? What was the point of Riverrun? and then the thing we're going to talk about after, which I am excited about.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep the hype and make you not think that we're just complaining the whole time.
The other thing wasn't to complain.
But Riverrun, we got 2 episodes, and you think 2 episodes too many.
Yeah, it's just the sum total thing, right? Because there was so much in play. Like, you look at last week's episode, we were excited about that. Like, oh, the Blackfish is back. There's a very interesting sort of moral quandary
How
here.
are they going to get out of it unscathed?
Right. Oh. And then it was like, it's interesting because, okay, I guess, the main thing here that it did is sort of basically remind you of Jaime's, love of Cersei. And we did talk early in the season, right? We did talk about how we felt like Jaime was kind of a weird, murky place. Like, we weren't quite sure what his drive was anymore, right?
Right.
And I guess this episode was said his drive is actually Cersei again. It's like it never really went away, even though there were times that they were at odds and this and that. So this episode was saying, no, it's still Cersei. And, I guess I liked, even though it was kind of weird in the moment, to be like, okay, yeah, he'll still do terrible things because he's so in love with his sister, because of his incestuous love of his sister. He'll like turn on a dime and, have sort of a bonding, what seemed like he was trying to have a bonding conversation, turn into like, I will kill your baby. So I thought that was interesting in and of itself, but everything else that happened in Riverrun ended up kind of going back to it didn't really need to happen.
Right. I mean, I think part of it is just like an excuse to develop Jaime, because the Dorne storyline, for all that, like, he did get that moment with Myrcella at the end, and I think we've decided off camera that's largely what has motivated him this season and drawn him back to Cersei, was having this loss with his daughter when he finally had that moment of being a father,
right.
and that pushed them back together. But the Dorne storyline did such a terrible job, I think, of giving Nikolai Coster-Waldau and Jaime like meaty material that I think they need an excuse to get him out of King's Landing, which is the main reason they did this. But I will say, the stuff, whether or not it was important in the scheme of things, the scenes with Jaime in this episode I thought were incredibly well done and incredibly well written. I thought it was interesting and I keep hyping this interview with Nikolai Coster-Waldau, but it's like my favorite thing that I've done, because I found out he's like the biggest Jaime and Brienne shipper, and he basically like wrote me fanfic, but it's not fanfic because that's how he was playing it, where he was just like, yeah, like what he told me is that he is in love with Brienne, and he totally would want to be with her in the way that Bronn was suggesting, but he can't because it's another like love he can never consummate, which is sort of what he has with Cersei. And I think that comes across a lot in their scene together. Right.
With Cersei, yeah.
Right. I think that comes across a lot in their interaction. He even has this great thing he said to me, which is when, Jaime makes Brienne keep the sword, and he's like, it's yours. Nikolai said, it's Jaime's way of saying, keep my heart, it will always be yours, which I was like, oh my God, like, really? Okay, but which is so interesting when it then goes to that scene with him and Edmure, and Jaime says, everything I do for Cersei. I love Cersei. And for a minute, I was just like, are you lying to yourself about how deep your affection for your sister runs and why it is? And I also asked Nikolai, because this is a question we had, which is like, why, after all the changes we've seen Jaime undergo, after all the time he spent away with Cersei, why did he just go back to her and stay with her? And he said it's because family is the most important thing to him at this point. So I'm curious to see. In a gross way. I mean, we're like 6 seasons into the.
So now we're so used to the incest.
Like
that
the most popular incest relationship of all time, that it's like socially acceptable on Game of Thrones for us to talk about it. I'm very curious to see what happens to the Lannisters as a family. We talked about this before a little bit. If the family is shattered, if the third child of Cersei dies and there isn't anything really to protect, what does that do for the one thing that Jaime has left to root for? Anyway, that was a really long way of saying I thought that the writing for Jaime this episode was really great between those two big scenes, and it worked for me.
And I'll say you're definitely right. Like, those were good Jaime scenes, and I already.
His Menzies was like, he finally got to talk.
He got to talk. You didn't bring him back
good.
to not talk. And then and I brought up earlier, I really liked the Bronn pod scene, which came from this storyline. So it's like there were good moments, but it is mostly I do feel it felt like, and again, we were talking to Jim Vejvoda before we came in here, and he's like, you don't know. Like, right, maybe there's something more we're not seeing here. But right now it feels like actually plot-wise, they were basically kind of just moving people around until they go back where they were, right?
I think Jaime left King's Landing, taking people out of the picture.
Brienne left Sansa because Brienne failed to get any help, The Blackfish came back. We're like, oh, cool, the Blackfish came back. He's so awesome last week, and now he's dead. I really wish he'd gotten that boat with Brienne, I felt like even if she came back with just the Blackfish, that would have been kind of a cool new element to throw into the mix, and what does he bring with him as far as his knowledge and background. Because it does seem that 2 episodes at Riverrun, which seem really cool setup, at the end of it, it's just like, okay, that was an incident where plot-wise, you're right, it's like some good character beats, but plot-wise, it felt like it could have happened off camera. Like, Jamie succeeded in getting Riverrun back,
Right.
that
Right.
could have happened.
And I agree. And I did like the Blackfish's line about how, I ran at the Red Wedding. I'm not going to run again, which I respect. Like, he is, as Jamie said, he's an old man. All he has left is an honorable death. I think there were 2 missteps in the way that was handled, which is what you were alluding to with the Wave's death happening off screen. One, the Blackfish deserves an honorable death.
Yeah.
Don't let it happen off screen. I asked the director, I'm like giving away my entire interview, but I asked him why. Why did you have this happen off screen? He said it was in the script, but the writer's intent was it would like take away from the point of the scene, and he sort of was like, the samurai warrior who went down fighting. But I think that they misjudged not only the popularity of that character and the fact that like there are a few honorable deaths, deserving deaths on Game of Thrones. I think to see him, even a quick moment of him going down fighting would have been really powerful and a nice way to end that long Red Wedding storyline that we're seeing come to an end. But also the misstep of people don't believe that a character is dead.
Right.
If we don't see them die on Game of Thrones. And I fully believe that the Blackfish did die, even though we didn't see him.
I was actually arguing with Fowler about this because he thought maybe.
But that's the thing. And I mean, even when we see people die, they aren't always dead on Game of Thrones. So I think those were 2 mistakes, and that did leave sort of like a sour taste in my mouth. Even though I loved like the cute little wave goodbye as Jamie let Brienne and Pod go.
I think it was just that in one episode we had Dany sort of saved the day off camera. We had the waif die off camera, and we had the Blackfish die off camera. And it was just too much in one episode. Even though we both liked the waif thing particularly, like felt like that worked in its, what it was doing. It was just in the one episode to have so much happening. It just felt like too much.
The balance of these scenes, like as much as we haven't even gotten to the Hound and the Brotherhood, but like those are scenes that took a decent chunk of the episode, and like these great like 2 character conversation scenes, or 3 in the case of Terri and Missandei, right? Where I'm like, those are great. And I really like those. Those are my favorite parts of this episode, but it does just feel out of balance with these other things that you're cutting at the expense of those longer scenes. And I mean, this is why I commentate and I write. Right. Like, I'm not a director. I'm not a writer on a TV show. I don't have those answers, but it did just feel out of balance to me.
That was the main thing to me. Again, watching a show that I love. It's weird. I'm going to make a weird comparison here between this episode of Game of Thrones and X-Men Apocalypse. As someone who actually has enjoyed all the other Bryan Singer X-Men movies, I was watching X-Men Apocalypse, I'm like, something's off. Like the first 20 minutes, it's like whatever I felt clicked in the other Singer X-Men movies isn't here. And that's a little bit what I felt with Game of Thrones this week. Again, on a show that I absolutely think is great. It's just like there was something like the balancing act of things. And of course, it's this huge undertaking they're doing. And just this episode, I think there was, when there's so many plot points happening at once, I think, that's got to be one of the biggest challenges to making the show, right? Is that it's so spread out, it's such a big world, so many characters. And just the simple thing of all 3 of those things happening off camera in the same episode, right? They might have worked spread out and slightly handled differently, but when they happen one after the other, you're kind of like, okay.
I think that was why we had the same problem before, that we got a bit of flack from people, which is funny because we're going to go into a big theory that we have. But the whole idea of like 3 episodes in a row, revealing fan theories that have existed for years, pretty much exactly as people expected, like 1 or 2, but it was just 3 is a trend, and that felt off for us. But yeah, I'm already ready for the flack that we're going to get for the theory that we dive into after last week. We were talking about how all the theorizing is like ruining elements of Game of Thrones.
That's what we're here for.
We're here for your anger, internet.
Let us know, what did you think though of the Riverrun storyline? Did you think it was worth it? Did you as far as we were talking about the character scenes, or did you feel like story-wise that could have happened off camera? So let us know, and the Blackfish Blackfish coming back. I think that's a big one. Would you like to have seen more with the Blackfish in his return? And do you think he's really dead? He's dead.
He's dead.
I think he's dead. All right, so it's funny because we were talking about theories, and I actually don't know which one you thought we were going to jump to. We have two theories we're going to talk about. Well, actually, one big one we're going to talk about right here, which is let's talk about Cersei.
Yes, that was the one.
Yeah. Let's talk about the King's Landing of it all. We got Cersei saying the I choose violence. Again, maybe it's because it had been a trailer for months now, and yes, seeing the mountain rip a dude's face off is certainly impressive.
Yeah.
But since it was kind of all that happened in that moment, again, this is probably where we hype ourselves up too much. But I think when we saw it in the trailer, we probably thought there was even more was going to happen in that moment.
Oh no, I loved that scene, and it's funny. We haven't really talked about it at all, but I do think I was dreading a little bit the proximity of the "I choose violence" line with the terrible shooting that happened, the night before. It's just, not only a tragedy, but when the, different elements of art happen to, align timing-wise with these things, sometimes things don't land as well. So I was dreading that scene a little bit, and I thought in the context, her choice, it wasn't an issue for me, which is a little bit meta. And what were you gonna?
Well, I was just gonna say that it's funny because I've been rereading Preacher, the comic book, because the TV show's out, and Preacher is a very bigger than life comic, and and I was thinking watching that scene, that is a very sort of Garth Ennis scene. Everything about, I know the Mountain is played by an actual actor who's a huge guy, but he's so bigger than life.
Yeah.
And what he does is so preposterous, that it works as just sort of this insanity of it's everything. It was very comic booky in a way I loved.
Yeah.
She's got this guy by his side. He can tear someone's face off.
I for all the bad things that happened to Cersei afterwards, and sort of the slow burn of the King's Landing storyline, which people
slow burn. You say?
Well, we'll get to that. But people in the comments have been like, "You keep forgetting King's Landing." We aren't forgetting King's Landing. We aren't talking about King's Landing because there hasn't been that much that we consider worthy of talking about in the amount of time that we have. But I did I don't know, that scene. I watched it the first time and I went and then I watched it with a bunch of other people later in the night, and I was like, this scene is, I don't know, just one of those moments you're like, holy crap. That worked for me.
It's been weird, because I know we have skipped King's Landing a lot, and I think it has been that it's become one of the least exciting parts. Also, something Matt's mentioned is reviews. It's been weird because, especially once Jaime left, it became a battle between villains. It's like Cersei, while she's nuanced, it's has last week kind of reminded us with those great lines about, well, this is all your fault. It's you're not really rooting for Cersei. You're certainly not rooting for the Sparrow. So it's been a weird.
Are we rooting for Marjorie? Not really. Certainly not Tommen.
Yeah. and Marjorie's actually been somewhat peripheral. When she comes in, she's interesting, but she hasn't been front and center. So it's been a weird storyline that King's Landing used to feel a lot more crucial than it has. For a while.
That being said, I came to a realization last week after we recorded Last Dragons, which is, of all the storylines that were getting wrapped up soon, I think, ironically, that's the storyline I'm most interested to see how it comes together.
Right.
Because for a while I had no idea, and I was like, how do we had this question about the Riverlands, and obviously that came together fairly easily, which we were like, how do they do that? In this one, I don't see it coming together that easily, but we do have a fun theory about what might happen, what the rumor that Qyburn might have investigated was.
Because that was actually obviously a big moment, because so Cersei gets the news that there is no trial by combat, which seems to have, Matt did a video specifically about the fact that it seems to put an end to a big fan theory, at least for now.
R.I.P. Clegane Bowl.
Yeah, Clegane Bowl. Yeah, at least that's not where this specifically is aiming. But then right after that, she's told about the rumors and are they true. And you and Matt were both thought of the same thing.
I seriously thought of this on my own in a vacuum. So many theories I'll get from Reddit, and this one I was going back and looking at Bran's visions, and I was I puzzled it out. And then everyone else and their mother figured it out last night, and I felt a lot less special.
So Bran's visions?
Bran's visions. Now, I would love if Bran started having, she was a Greenseer too. So I wrote this whole thing. I was I figured it out. And then I was well, everyone figured it out. But the theory is basically that traveling back into the past a little bit, before Jaime killed the Mad King, which in the same Bran vision I'm referencing, where we see sort of wildfire being put under King's Landing by the pyromancers, the Mad King had ordered all of this wildfire to be made, and the fact that he had it made was what caused Cersei to order a lot of it developed in season 2, that Tyrion then took all her stores and used to fight Stannis at the Battle of Blackwater.
Yeah.
So we've seen wildfire before. But the Mad King's plan during Robert's rebellion was to burn down all of King's Landing, and so he had like these massive quantities of wildfire placed under the city, and he believed, because he was a Mad King, that the city would burn down, he would burn, he'd die, but he'd be reborn as a dragon. Jaime killed him before he could do this, and that put an end to that plan, which is why in Bran's visions, when you see a bunch of wildfire like being set alight and coming through a tunnel seemingly underneath the city, that doesn't make sense because that never happened. So the theory is basically that Cersei heard a rumor about these stores of wildfire. Hey, her brother was the one who stopped the Mad King, not too surprising.
Yeah.
Qyburn's little birds found it, and she might either set some of the city, like under the Sept of Baelor, or all the city on fire, thus being that shot that we see in the vision. And interestingly, tying it back to season 2 again, when Dany has that vision in the House of the Undying and she walks into the throne room, and the throne room is destroyed, the Red Keep is destroyed, and it looks like it's covered in snow. So we think winter is coming. It might actually be ash because King's Landing has been torched.
Yeah.
That I'm like, I'm on board. I like it. I think a lot of people are like, oh, that would be awesome if that's how it came to pass. And like, again, you know, speaking of theories and us trying to figure it all out, I think we might have figured out what she does, but not the aftermath.
Yeah.
And that, like, who does she try and kill? How does it happen? Does she kill Tommen?
Right.
Because I don't think we think that Tommen is going to live through this season.
No.
Though I was thinking about what he'll be remembered as. Like, you know, everyone, like the Mad King era, is like what Tommen's, you know, little like adjective will be. And I was like, it's just going to be
pushover king.
No, I'm going to be like, it's Tommen the weak. Like, he was just, he as much as I liked Tommen at the beginning, he is just not.
He's manipulated a lot.
Yeah.
I think, yes, I do think that's where it's aiming, and I'm excited for it because while Cersei is not a character you like root for per se, she's a great character. And I like the idea, especially because, as we're saying, one reason King's Landing hasn't been as interesting is it's sort of filled with corrupt, evil, or easily manipulated characters. But the idea that maybe that does have to all come down, right? And we've talked.
Why wouldn't she burn down the city? It's turned against her. It really has never truly loved her. What does she? We keep talking about like there's no one left in King's Landing. This is a good way to resolve that.
Yeah, and take it off the board. And I think we've also has spoken about, you know, the end of the show probably not being a simple like, and here's the new person sitting on the Iron Throne thing. The idea that it might be even like a new way of leading and whatnot. And if you took down King's Landing, like literally, physically, I think that's a good way to set that up, right?
Oh God, I'm like so excited
about
that idea.
So yeah, see, now we're excited about King's
Landing. It's not all complaining. You just had to wait for it.
Yeah, they got us back. So I also think that's where it's aiming. I think it makes a lot of sense. I really like the fact that it's sort of a callback to that season 2 vision stuff as well. I'm trying to,
and not in a way that I think people really expected in any meaningful way, because you see that, and I remember that was like my Twitter like header for a while. That gorgeous shot, they just take the most gorgeous shots of the throne room, and the one was just it covered in what I thought was snow.
Right.
So for that to be ash and us to think that's winter, but that's actually this destruction we didn't anticipate is very, very George R. R. Martin.
Man, it's driving me crazy.
What?
Something I watched very recently had a vision of snow falling, and then you realize at the end it's actually ash
Agents
falling.
of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad it's a show that you also watch because I was going to ask such a. But that's, of course, that's one of the problems of the fact that we are getting payoffs to setups from decades ago. As other people will probably beat them to versions of that.
Although interestingly enough, you know, I don't remember. No, I think Dany might. I think that might have been the same in the book because I know they did tweak the stuff with Drogo.
Seeing Khal Drogo.
Rhaegal, I think whatever the name of her baby, Rhaego. No, it was Rhaego.
Yeah.
Like that stuff was just in the show, but I think you're right. I think that we did get that imagery of the throne room covered in.
Yeah, and even if we only got it on the show, it's still been a few years.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
So
Good work. Good work, Game of Thrones. We like it. Give us more.
So do you agree with us? Is Cersei going to go full wildfire on this place? Burn this mother down?
Yeah. Burn them all!
Right? And Arya's excited for it as we are. You know? See, we're not just grumpy about Game of Thrones this week. All right, so last thing we're going to talk about is the Brotherhood return, but this will also touch upon some book stuff. So it's the same book stuff we talked about a couple weeks ago. So yeah, there's your warning that we're going to delve into stuff from the books that they have not included on the show, but maybe they will. So, all right.
Before you go in,
yeah.
Do you think that they're ever going to do Lady Stoneheart?
See, I keep going back and forth because I was with a lot of people that recent events seem to be aiming there more and more, right? And we talked about like, okay, they're bringing up Caitlyn, they're bringing up a lot of things around her so much then they name drop the Brotherhood. What we didn't mention, because we had a long, we talked about Lady Stoneheart a couple weeks ago. What we didn't talk about was last week when the specifics of Brother Ray being killed. A lot of people are like, oh, he was hung. And in the books, that's like Lady Stoneheart, what happens with her when she's leading the Brotherhood. So a lot of people thought that when they actually caught up to the Brotherhood, she'd already be with them. Mm-hmm. And then this episode, that's not happening, right? So that kind of undercuts the like, oh, maybe they're not. I still feel maybe it all goes back to that, what we don't have the answer to, which is when they talked to George R. R. Martin, with Benioff and Weiss. What did he tell them about like the long-term plan for Lady Stoneheart, and was it important enough that she has to come in or not?
Yeah, I mean, I came to I remember in season 3, I was like, if they don't do it now, they'll never do it.
Yeah.
And they didn't do it. And I feel like every season there's been something that builds back a little bit of hope. Yeah. And then even this year, I was like, I had given up all hope, and I'm at the point though, I don't want them to do it. And when it was Beric, and my big issue with the Brotherhood last week, and that I was like, oh, maybe they've setting up this.
Turned their back on any ideals they had.
Exactly. And so for it to be Beric and say these guys were using our name improperly, and then they did that thing with the Hound where they decided who to kill. I liked that, and I liked it better than Lady Stoneheart because I stand by that. The Lady Stoneheart reveal came at such an important point in that story. Yeah. It was so needed, this reincarnation of revenge, even if she hasn't done that much since, or that much that we know of. For it to happen now would feel very fan servicey, and it would come in a season where so many characters have been brought back to the dead, really lack impact, I think, because of that. And also, I don't know if the idea of this modeled, slightly decomposing Catelyn who needs to shove her fingers into the hole in her throat to speak through, walking zombie rage machine, will translate as well on this show as it does with that really gruesome sort of even horror tinged imagery that we have in the books.
Yeah. I agree with. I don't need it, right?
Yeah.
And there was this season was the first time that I thought, oh, maybe they are simply it's like cold hands coming in and things that they had felt like they'd skipped. There was a lot of, and then bringing up the past so much, I started to think, but I don't need it. I don't think it's necessary. It's people are excited about it for the reveal. In a way, they're excited about it for. Book readers, I should say, in the way that they were excited for the Red Wedding and things, to watch people's faces who haven't read the book, right? It's like, oh my God, they're gonna freak. But outside of that, I don't know if it's necessary,
and I loved these scenes with the Hound and him coming back in contact with Beric, because I had forgotten that the last time they saw each other, he did kill Beric.
Yeah.
And you just get the sense, a lot. And I love that they acknowledge that, and he's like, whatever, I would have killed you before you had this Lord of Light guy on your side. I love that everyone feels tired. They sit down and the Hound and Beric and Thoros, they're just tired, and they're like, what? There's no point in sure, you kill this guy, and that sort of thing. And also that Beric Dondarrion and Thoros Amir are the Brotherhood are the only people other than Jon's whole crew that knows hey, there are cold winds coming from the north. There's a bigger battle yet to come. finally.
Right.
And the fact that the last episode of this season is called The Winds of Winter, I feel like that harkens a little bit. And after our complaining last week, sorry, I'm talking so much, but I'm very excited about this. We were like, why bring back the Hound? Why spend so much time with him? For him to go and be a part of this war, and for Beric echoing what Brother Ray said to him, like, you still have like a good fight left in you.
Yeah.
You still can have a role to play if you want to be a part of this. Makes me like appreciate more how much time we spent on him last week and the fact they're bringing him back.
And also, you know, I was one of those people who was like, I don't know, the whole Clegane Bowl thing like sounds fan servicey, right? And so I didn't need that either. And this is much more interesting to me. Like if he joins the Brotherhood, whether officially or just walking with them, and goes to the north to fight is more interesting, you know, because again, it's like another reason we don't think Clegane Bowl is happening is like he's not going to King's Landing, you know.
Right.
Not only is trial by combat not a thing anymore, but he's not even going to the right place. This is more interesting, if the Hound sort of finds his purpose here, you know, fighting alongside them, you know, aiming towards, you know, inevitably some form of giant group team up that I think has to happen.
Okay,
you know?
so you also think they're going to head north in that direction?
Yeah, I mean they imply it, and it's like the Hound doesn't end the episode saying I'm on board, but you know, I think
barring Sansa like dying in next week's episode, I'm like emotional just thinking about it. The Hound and Sansa reunion.
Yeah,
I think that could be like one of the most beautiful things that the show has ever done. And going back to the Jaime thing, what his comment to Brienne of, I didn't think that she would, you know, live this long. In my experiences, girls like her don't. And Brienne's reaction, you don't know.
Yeah.
Girls like her, I can't imagine many things. Obviously, Sansa and Arya reunion, but I can't imagine many things more emotionally charged than those two characters coming back together. And I hope that we get to see it happen.
I hope so too, and that's one of what's one of the great things about the Hound, and that's why to me, like, the Hound's gonna go back to King's Landing, he's gonna fight the Mountain and beat him. Okay, I get like the coolness of that, but the Hound's most interesting interesting stuff has been his interaction with other characters, like in his relationships. You know, his relationship with Arya, which was amazing, but also there was that stuff with Sansa too. So I don't know. I just feel like, where they're going is more interesting now, I think, than what we thought last week.
Yeah,
so.
Eric Goldman and Terry Schwartz, slayers of Clegane Bowl hype.
Slayers of Clegane Bowl.
I do. We'll wrap up that, and if you do have any question or any comments about it, what your thoughts on the Brotherhood reveal and Lady Stoneheart not being where we went, we definitely want to hear from you. But I wanted to bring up something to you that we haven't even talked about off camera yet. Varys. Varys has this moment where he goes off and has a secret mission that we don't know about. Do you have any theories, any thoughts? I've been thinking about that when we were talking about the Tyrion stuff, and I'm like, I don't know. This is another rogue agent out there.
Yeah, that was an odd one to me because he's been gone from anywhere else for so long. So it's hard to could he go back to King's Landing, or could it be Littlefinger? Who he had a weird, like, sort of almost dueling schemers relationship with. You know? I don't know.
It's interesting because unless he has like a speed ship that is going to get him back to King's Landing from Meereen, like in the next 20 minutes, if we're right about our wildfire theory, there might not be a King's Landing left for him to go back to. And so I am almost wondering, like, do you think he's going to go to Volantis, which is where he might meet up with Yara, or even, I don't know, I just like really want the show to do Valyria. They did a little bit with Jorah and Tyrion last season, but I would love for like Varys to go to Valyria and find out some like secret to magic and dragons and everything there.
I could see him, whether or not he goes there or not, I could definitely see him running into maybe a character he hasn't seen before, and like Sam or someone out there. You know, I think we're getting more and more of these like characters crossing paths who haven't before. So I think that's inevitable. So those are our thoughts on this week. We complained a lot, but we didn't only complain.
We're very excited about some key things.
Yeah. So what did you think overall of No One? Do you think it was the greatest episode ever? Do you hate us? Or do you have some issues with it? You can tweet us questions and comments. Hashtag Dragons on the Wall to Terri_Schwartz, the Eric Goldman. And for all things Game of Thrones, keep it here at IGN.